Chapter 7. Mud stopped at the top of the rise with Hera beside him. Below, the mountain sloped down into a wide hollow. A cluster of wood and stone cottages stood in the middle, surrounded by newly plowed fields. The squat, burly dwarves were out in the fields planting their spring crops. They braided their long beards so they wouldn't get caught on the shovel or seed bags they carried over their shoulders. Their deep tan skin and earthy-colored clothes made them look much like the fields they planted. Mud grimaced. Loosening the soil from with the plow was bad enough. He had to do it a time or two when he hadn't disappeared fast enough in the mornings. But the actual work of putting the seeds into the ground was the most tedious thing he could think of. "Come on," Hera said, down the hill. Sentai said their leader is a dwarf named Stonefish Drakecutter. If anyone around here knows what that door is, it's him. Mud fingered the folded parchment into his pocket. The smell of dinner cooking rose up from the village. He licked his lips and strode at her hater, catching and passing her within a few steps. A polite inquiry with the first group of dwarves they met led him to the biggest field in the valley. A dwarf about Mud's age, in dwarven years, and an old dwarf with gray in his beard toiled in the late afternoon sun. As Mud walked up, he heard the young dwarf muttering to himself, "Ha! Another draconian dead in the hands of the great Drake Cutter. No, it's still moving." The dwarf gripped the shovel's smooth wooden handle and plunged the blade into the ground, stabbing again and again in such a frenzy that his bushy brown beard threatened to come out of its intricate braids. "A little less shovel and a little more seed, Green Thumb," the old dwarf said from the next row over. "Just think how this field will look in the fall, tall green corn stalks bending their leaves to the sun, with golden tassels shimmering in the wind. We'll harvest bushel after bushel of ripe ears." The old dwarf dropped a seed in the ground, moved forward a step, and planted another. "I don't care about corn." Green Thumb threw his shovel on the ground. "Farming is boring. Let me go on an adventure. I want to do something grand with my life." Mud stifled a laugh. Neither dwarf had noticed him and Hera yet, and he didn't want to interrupt such an interesting exchange. "Farming is grand," the old dwarf, whom Mud figured must be Stonefish Drakecutter, said. "We're planting the seeds of new life. There's nothing better." A radiant smile lit up his scarred and wrinkled face. He cradled the seeds in his rough hands. "Maybe farming is great to you now, but you got to fight in the war. You've already proven yourself a hero. I want to do the same." Green Thumb kicked a dirt clod, spraying the brown soil into the air. "I've fought that war so you wouldn't have to," Stonefist snapped, pointing at Green Thumb, "so we could have a free land to live in and plant in peace." His face grew red and he started panting faster, his long gray beard swaying in the rhythm with his shovel and seeds. Green Thumb threw a handful of seeds in the hole and kicked dirt over the top. "After the seeds are planted, just let me go for a few months. As long as I take Drakecutter, I'll be safe." "No," his father said. He dropped the shovel and bag of seeds and marched over to Green Thumb. "You will never, ever touch my axe." He shook his stout fist in Green Thumb's face and growled, "It is magic, blessed by Varrox, the god of crafting, but I paid a high price for that blessing, my own blood quenched in its forging. The magic gives it power to cut through dragon scales, but if the axe is ever lost or broken, the Drakecutter family will be doomed." Silence fell over the field. Mud cleared his throat. "Master Drakecutter, may I have a moment?" Green Thumb whirled around, startled. His face went red when he saw Mud and Hera. He picked up his shovel and went back to planting, grumbling under his breath. "Yes, children, what can I do for you?" Stonefist answered, stepping over the furrows to Mud and Hera. Mud bit his tongue to keep from objecting at being called a child, but Stonefist was likely to be well over 300 years old. Compared to that, Mud and Hera were children indeed. Mud reached for the parchment in his pocket. "I was wondering if you'd ever seen—" A shadow passed over the sun, and Stonefist looked up. "By all the abyss!" he growled. A bolt of fear went through Mud. He knew what he would see before he wrenched his gaze to the sky. A rush of hot air hit Mud as the same red dragon that had destroyed Potter's Mill passed overhead, roaring toward the dwarf village. Mud stood paralyzed for a moment. Green Thumb fell to his knees. Hera pulled an arrow from her quiver with shaking hands, put it to the bowstring, and headed for the dragon. A cone of fire shot from the dragon's wicked jaws and seared a row of houses. Stonefish shook himself and sprinted for the town. "Not my village!" he shouted. "Get away, you foul beast!" He passed Hera in a mad rush. Green Thumb dragged himself to his feet and started after his father. At the same moment the mud mastered his own fear and raced after Hera. The red dragon snapped up a dwarf, then ran from a burning house. The dwarf's scream ended as it disappeared down the dragon's throat. She roared in delight and breathed out another jet of fire. Stone cottages melted in the heat from her breath. The stench of sulfur and burning rock filled the air. Step by step, Mud forced himself toward the red monster. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the screams of the dwarf villagers. Stonefist ran toward the largest house at the edge of the village. Hera dropped to her knees behind a dirt embankment just outside the village and sent an arrow up at the dragon. Mud hunched down beside her and fumbled with his own bow. Green Thumb raced into the village right behind his father. The dragon roared and settled onto the street between Stonefist and his house. Her burning eyes stared down at the two dwarves. Stonefist dropped his gaze to the dragon's chest, avoiding eye contact. "You've made a serious mistake coming here," he shouted. The dragon laughed, sending a cloud of black smoke up from her nostrils. "I hear the terrible Stonefist Drakecutter has taken up farming. Something you should have thought of doing before coming here to meet your doom," Stonefist said. The dragon lunged forward. A massive claw caught Stonefist in the side and sent him flying through the air. He slammed into a burning building. The structure gave way, burying him in the rubble. "No!" Green Thumb yelled, and charged the dragon, wielding the shovel he still clutched. And this must be little Green Thumb. The dragon lowered her head and stared Green Thumb in the eyes. "I will kill you!" Green Thumb growled. "With that magic axe you have in your hands?" The dragon's voice sent an eerie chill down Mud's spine. "Uh-oh," Mud said. "What?" Hera said, stopped shooting since Green Thumb was between them and the dragon. "I think the dragon just hypnotized him," Mud whispered. "Come on, then," the dragon said to Green Thumb. "Let's see what you can do." Green Thumb lunged forward and hit the dragon's leg with the shovel. It bounced off, vibrating so hard he almost dropped it. "Nice try, little one," the dragon said. Green Thumb shook its head and hefted the shovel with a puzzled look on his face. While the dragon filled the air with hot laughter, Green Thumb darted forward. He ran up the dragon's front leg and swung the shovel with all its strength, striking at the dragon's exposed lower neck. The weapon splintered in his hands and clattered away to the ground. The dragon shook herself, sending Green Thumb flying. He hit the ground on his back. Before he could move, the dragon pressed a claw over his chest, smashing the air out of him. "You will never be half the fighter your father was," she said, sneering, "but you'll fill my needs for the time being." Unfurling her wings, the dragon leaped into the air and soared away. Mud jumped up and raced toward Green Thumb and the burning building that had collapsed over Stonefist. Coughing, Green Thumb staggered to his feet and stared at the broken pieces of the shovel on the ground. A look of understanding came into his eyes. He hadn't been wielding his father's axe after all. The red dragon had destroyed most of the village, but the Drakecutter home stood untouched. Green Thumb dashed into his house. He came back out a moment later. "It's gone!" he cried. "The axe is gone!" And that'd be the end of Chapter 7.